wrapped up, ready to go. But I think you need to relax a bit, Shane, and probably have some oat milk in your coffee or some almond milk or something like that. Yeah. I think you need to chill out. I think it'd be good for you.
Sure. G'day, I'm Shane Webcke, Queensland Safety Ambassador. Welcome to my farm at Summer Hill. We're here today to have a safety chat about working around overhead power lines. Now my mate Glenn Cook from Energy Queensland joins me today. Now Glenn, you're all over this stuff and you're going to walk us through this chat today.
Thanks Shane for the beautiful intro, mate. My name is Glenn Cook, most people call me Cookie, and it's a beautiful part of the world you got here, mate. I'm quite jealous, to be honest. But I'm just going to tell you quickly a little bit about myself, or what makes me an expert, I suppose. I've been an electrician for over 30 years. The bulk of that time I was on the tools, climbing poles, digging holes, putting power lines back up. But part of that role is dealing with fatalities and electrocutions. And on my time on the tools, I was actually involved in several accidental contacts with power lines where people have perished. Just terrible incidents. And I moved from Cairns to Hervey Bay about 10 years ago, and one of the first jobs that I had to do was a fatality where a painter had actually accidentally contacted an overhead power line. And that's sort of how I fell into this role, because my employer then, Ergon Energy, came to me and said, you know, you've been involved in a few of these incidents, do you want to change your career path? And that's how I fell into safety, if you get my drift. So my job now is to be an advocate for different industries such as agriculture, construction, aviation, to see what it is that Ergon and Energex can do better to get people the information that they need to work safely around power lines. You know. We've also got Stacey Oslands here from the Electrical Safety Office. So I'll tell us a little bit about yourself, Stace, and what it is you do at the Electrical Safety Office.
Well, thanks Glenn, and thanks for having us at the farm today, Shane.
Pleasure.
I'm Stacey Oslands. I'm the Director of the Supply and Networks team at the Electrical Safety Office. My background is about 20 years in regulation in the electrical and construction industry. And the Supply and Network team at the Electrical Safety Office, we're a small team. We're very passionate about safety, particularly around overhead power lines. Collectively, about 140 years of experience, people similar to yourself, Glenn. So yeah, we're really happy to be here today and promote the hazards around working near overhead power lines.
So Shane, tell us a little bit about your role as a safety ambassador in Queensland and what it means for you working on your farm here.
Well look, sadly the only reason I'm a safety ambassador is because my father was killed in a workplace accident. But what that has done in me over a long period of time, that was 27 years ago now, but over a long period of time it's made me very aware that those moments that we think will never happen, sometimes they do. And you guys all know that. You've seen what it's like. And it changes lives, it changes your world, and it never goes back together again. But it's always something, like if you think about it, and it's the same with my dad's accident, it's a second in time. And a different decision means that it would never have happened. So what that's done to me, obviously I go around and I talk to people and try to express all of that and what it feels like and try to relay the horror of when it goes wrong and how bad it really is. But in my own practical sense, working here on the farm for me, when I'm not employing people, but when people come here to work for me, I'm just looking for those really practical things which help keep us aware, because that's the trick. The trick is we all know where the danger is. That's not the problem really. We understand what's dangerous and what's not. We just get complacent about it. We forget where things are. And that's why, and we recently had rotamarkers put on our power lines. And it's funny, when we talk about that awareness, now I've been coming down, looking at this crop behind us, and I wouldn't have, until we put the rotamarkers up a little while ago, I wouldn't have said that I went down there and I saw the crop and then I saw the power lines. I wouldn't have known they were there. Yet I come down here now to have a look at the grain and how it's going, and catching my eye is this rotamarker which is moving. Now that doesn't mean that I walk back up to the house and I say to Mum, I went down and had a look at the crop and I saw the power line as well. But I now know it's in my consciousness, if you like. So if I was down here today with a header and a chaser bin, I would know, I'd be thinking, right, just power lines are there. And sometimes that's as simple as this. I've had enough scares out here, either ploughing or harvesting and different things we've done. I've had enough scares to know that forgetfulness, that losing the attention about where things are, it's real and it happens quickly.
It's funny you tell you that attention, because there's a term for that. It's called inattentional blindness. So everyone that I've spoken to in the last 10 years in this role all have a very similar story. they all go, I knew it was there, I just didn't see it. So it's very real. Our eyes and our brain actually don't work that well together. Like, we're humans, we make mistakes. You know, our eyes and our brain don't work like the video camera on your phone. You simply do not capture everything in your sphere of vision, right? So like you said, it's that one point in time where you didn't see something and it's got you, right? So it's really important to have a plan, and if part of those plan is to mark the power lines with a rotomarker. And like you said, because of the movement negates inattentional blindness, all right? So Scott, we've got Scott Munro here from Workplace Health and Safety. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you do at the division?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn, and thanks, Shane, for having us here today, and good morning to Stacey. I'm a Principal Inspector with Workplace Health and Safety Queensland. I'm based in the Toowoomba office, so I'm part of the Toowoomba Inspector team. I've been with the department for around 15 years, and part of my role is to audit workplaces, including agricultural workplaces, and attend incident scenes. So over the years, we've attended a number of incidents involving power lines, including minor incidents right through to fatalities. So I guess my role is really to try and stop these things happening.
Stacey, there is some laws and legislation around working near power lines for an obvious reason, because if you get too close, it's going to get you. So do you want to tell us a little bit about just the safety laws in general?
Absolutely. I mean, overarching is the Electrical Safety Act and regulation, but the main thing around overhead power lines, particularly in a farming setting, is the exclusion zones. It's a minimum 3 metres, like a bit of a box, you know, sides, height, each side. Don't go within the exclusion zones. The higher the voltage, the greater the exclusion zone. And we do have a code of practice for working near overhead power lines. So if you're not sure, get online, look at the code of practice and include it in your plan for safe work. Just make sure you know them there. But Shane, I was just noticing you've got a rotomarker on your stay wire.
Well, I actually made a point of asking them to do that, and apparently it is something that's starting to become more prevalent, because that, like the overhead power lines, yes, the poles, yes, but those stay wires can be very, very hard to see. And just having that there, and they work the same way, but they catch a little less wind, but they are still there. And because that's why I fear that if we're going to have an incident here, it will be one of these stay wires, because you just lose them. And particularly when you're turning machines around and that, you got a lot to think about, a lot to look at. And if you hook onto one of them, I'm very fearful about what would happen. This pole's under a lot of pressure from wires from a couple of different directions, that if I'd hit it, that'd stay. So that I think if you're going to put rotomarkers on the lines, I'd be putting them on the stays as well. It's just another layer of, as you say, making sure that attention isn't turned off.
That's for sure. And small movements, like a pole that's just bumped or the stay that's just bumped, can make huge differences in the power line height in the middle between the two poles. So small movements at the top can be metres, you know, can be lowered down. So just having a rotomarker installed, say that was a storm that came through and a pole was struck by lightning, if that rotomarker comes down below the height that it normally is, you will see it, and you won't go back into that paddock. So once again, it's about having that plan. What is some of our control measures that we've got in place to make sure that we do see it? And the rotomarkers are making a huge difference.
Stacey, I wanted to ask you a question though, and this, when you were talking about exclusion zones, because I didn't understand this and it was explained to me some time ago, but electricity can actually jump or arc, can't it? So it fascinates me to think that, say, if I had an auger or something go inside that exclusion zone, but close enough that power could actually arc, I'm assuming that that's a pretty bad outcome if that happens.
Absolutely, and that's why it is so important to know about the exclusion zones and keep out of them. It can jump through the air to an object or to a person, obviously with overhead power lines on a farm, but it can be at home, a ladder to clean your gutters, and other industries as well have this issue. We've got a lot of incidents with the transport industry, with trucks parking under lines overnight, tipping the bed of a tray the next morning to get the water off, and it arcs. And electricity can be fatal. You must always assume that those lines are live, even if they're down, assume that they're live, because the consequences are, very serious, if not fatal. So it's really important to be aware, have a safe system of work. And Scott, your team do a lot of education around the safe system of work as well.
Oh, we certainly do. One of the first things we look at when we come to a farm or to any workplace where there is overhead power is what are their processes and procedures around working around that. And the processes and procedures should be around not working around it if they can. We certainly will look at any type of machinery equipment they're using on farm, mobile augers, harvesting equipment, spray rigs, tractors, any of that equipment that elevates, that's likely to come within that exclusion zone. So we really look at there having some sort of procedures and plans around the operation of that and training of their operators, supervising of their operators, and having and reporting incidents, even the closest things like near misses. Like we might have come close to it, but we need to look at that and make sure we don't next time.
But you speak about taking that plan and cookie. Sorry, I'll interrupt, but I recently took the step to get these rotamarkers installed, so I know what it takes and how it's done. But Cookie, just explain to people who might be watching, if they have the thought now that perhaps this is a good idea, how do they go about it?
So we've incentivised the use of rotamarkers, in particular for the agricultural and aviation industry. So we know that they're making a huge difference because of that spinning motion and the inattentional blindness. So we are installing them for $100 each, okay, up to 10 per property. That's just a starting point. So about $1,000, you can make your farm safer if you've got power lines running through paddocks like you've got here or down the side. You're mentioning before, Stacey, about, tippers and equipment on your farm. It's really important to know how high things go, I speak to so many tipper operators and you say to them, how high is your tipper go? And they go, all the way, Cookie. It's like, or a lot. Yeah, it's pretty high, It's like, it's imperative to understand how high the power lines are. You get that information from Ergon Energy or Energex. We'll come out, we'll measure the power line heights for you. We'll tell you it's a 3-metre exclusion zone. You need to have a safety observer in place to work near the power line. And, the heights of your machinery. What machinery is going to impact the overhead power lines? And then, you've got the lower stuff as well with your poles and your stays, so.
But can I just recommend to people, if they are having the thought, I perhaps, and embarrassingly in some respects, I was a bit sceptical about how these would work and how much difference they would make, but I am literally astounded. And it happened more recently that I've got them there, but I'm astounded now, the level of awareness that I have. And I just know at some point, that is going to prevent something awful happening on this place. Yeah. So for what is a small investment, it's a huge investment in safety.
I will say, if any landowner out there uses aerial applicators, you 100% need these markers. And if you use them once every 7 years, that's when you need them even more. Because when they come in and it's wet and you can't get the spray rig in, you bring aerial applicators in, they come in, they can't see those wires. They can see those markers from a kilometre away. It gives them 6 times more time to react if they've missed the line or they weren't aware that it was there. So it's really important to get that in place. Anything else, Scott, you'd like to add around power line safety? Or, I was talking about spotters there before. Do you want to explain how that works?
Yeah, look, obviously, ideally, we want people to plan that they don't come within an exclusion zone or they're nowhere near that. But we know now, over the last 10, 15, 20 years, plant and equipment's got bigger and better, and plant is sometimes automatically getting close to that exclusion zone. So it's really important to have that spotter or safety observer, most people call them a spotter, to be able to alert the operator of the equipment that they may be getting close and make sure they're outside of that exclusion zone.
Sure.
Your point's a valid one, particularly now with the size of spray rigs, and we don't use them here. But I have contractors come here, and when they fold them up, those things, like the bigger machines, they are dead set, easily can go inside those exclusion zones.
Some of them can be at least 10 metres.
Yeah, exactly.
Very high. And power lines normally, or the legal height is around 5.5 metres. So normally we want to keep them a lot higher than that, but they can be very easily impacted. And
and I know I'm banging on about rotamarkers, but I'm that impressed. More recently, and you talk about tipping trucks, so we've got a little tipping truck here. Over another place we've got, there's a section of wire there which is actually quite low. It's still like inside, it's that 5 metre height. But I knew it was there, and I went over there. I was loading a fuel tank onto the back of this truck, so I had to tip the body all the way up. And I jumped out of that truck and I remembered that I was underneath the power line. And I looked up, and we were nowhere near it. And it would have been outside that 3 metres, so everything was right, but only by luck.
Yeah.
There was no management in that. And it just highlighted to me, and that was before I got these Rotamarkas, that was one of the things that made me think, you know what, I need to do something about this, because that, and I've learnt one thing. You start ignoring things like that, eventually the worst will happen. The longer you ignore it, the closer you get to the danger.
Yeah, and you talk about the worst that can happen. Obviously, a fatality is terrible for everyone involved, friends, family, workmates, employers. But there's also legal ramifications. And Stace, do you want to touch on that?
So, you know, a person who is a property owner running a farm with workers, they have duties and they need to ensure that their workers are safe and a safe system of work that, you know, Scott mentioned earlier. And electricity is dangerous, you know, it can arc, you can't see it, but it can be fatal. And earlier this year, the Electrical Safety Office launched Jason Daniels' story. It's online. If you haven't seen it, I really recommend that you jump online and have a look. And Jason and his mum tell a brave story about his contact with overhead lines. It was his first job on a property. He raised a safety concern with his boss, and it was absolutely a preventable incident. And Jason survived. So he is living with, you know, life-changing injuries that he lives with, and his mum talks about getting that phone call. But there are duties, you know, people have to do certain things under legislation to make sure that they are safe. And Scott, did you want to talk a bit more about the duty holders?
Oh, look, under our legislation, everyone's a duty holder essentially. So, but yeah, a person that conducts a business or undertaking, they have a duty to provide a safe workplace, a safe work environment. And under the Electrical Safety Act, there's a duty to conduct their work, their business or undertaking in a way or in a manner that's electrically safe. So we certainly look at those processes, procedures that they will have in place to make sure they're staying away from. It's really important that they educate their workers around electricity and educate them at how dangerous it can be, and educate them around the equipment and the tasks they're doing on farms to make sure that they avoid contact with those power lines.
Look, in the end, for me, I always, when I'm trying to get this across to people, in the end, it's fairly simple, right? And you're saying it before, Shane, you know, it's got to be simple and practical, right? If you have a very simple plan, right, you know where the power lines are, you know what equipment's going to impact them. So have a plan, put a spotter in place and stay 3 metres away. You will not hit power lines. They're all very much 100% avoidable. But the imperative thing is having that plan, right? So I can't say it enough, that Look Up and Live app, it's available at lookupandlive.com, and it's also available in the app stores, right? Go in, have a look. It's got a lot of information. You can study up on everything we've been talking about here today, including ordering some Rotamarkas that Shane loves so much.
They're very good.
You know, it's your idea for this stay stuff, mate. You're going to, you know.
Well, I'm looking to probably patent the idea and see what can happen with that. But yeah, no, but Cookie, I'm pretty sure I'm not the first bloke to have thought of it. But certainly, I think it's an important part of the whole package.
Now, Shane, you did mention before you've got contractors that come onto your property.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask Scott to tell us what some of the roles and responsibilities are for a landowner or a business owner to have with the workers that come onto your property.
Well, all business owners or persons that conduct a business or undertaking have an obligation to not only ensure that their own staff, but any contractors that come on their staff are aware of the power lines. It's important to identify the power lines and make sure they're all trained in the processes and the procedures around working around power lines on their farm.
Look, I will touch on one more thing, I suppose. It's what to do in an emergency. And the way I frame this with people is, if you understand how electricity works, you can save your life in an emergency situation, right? I always say knowledge is the best defence. If you understand that in the vehicle, you are safe, right? So the laws of electricity dictate to us that metal is a better conductor than the human body. So if a spray rig is folded out onto the machine, don't panic, don't try and get out of the machine. If you stay in that machine, you will be safe. A lot of the fatalities that I've seen is someone that panics and they're by themselves in a spray rig and they try and exit. If you touch the ground and the machine at the same time, it's going to arc, and arc's 30,000 degrees, right? It will get you. It's not a good place to be. So yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for coming to our Facebook Live. We'd like to have a few more of these. We might keep coming up here, Shane. I'm surprised how well you've done, mate. You know, you're a seasoned professional like yourself.
Well, thank you, Cookie. I mean, modesty forbids, but you know, like that.
Thanks to Stacey and thanks to Scott as well. I think we've all done a great job today. So yeah, we'll catch you next time.